Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the first 10 days of Muharram. This is a live webinar we are doing to cover various topics relevant to the first 10 days of Muharram. As always, we have Dr. Aslam Abdullah with us, and he needs no introduction. But today I will introduce him. Dr. Aslam has a doctorate in communications from University of London, England, in 1987. He's the chief editor of Muslim Media Network and the Muslim Observer. He has been a director for various Islamic centers here in California and Las Vegas. He has taught Arabic and Islamic studies at universities also. He's a regular contributor and resident scholar of IslamiCity. Dr. Aslam, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you very much for this.
We also have with us, and we're honored to have with us Dr. Hasnain Walji. He is an educator, historian, filmmaker, author. He has written over 20 books on nutrition and natural medicine. He has a lifelong quest to enable civil society to confront the realities of the current era. He is born in Tanzania of Indian ancestry. He is educated in United Kingdom also. That's where he knows Dr. Aslam from. And he has been promoting various issues related to social justice over the last 4 decades and 4 continents. He is also he also serves as the executive director for the United Global Initiative, which is an international NGO which focuses on active engagement and children and empowerment and children's health. And we welcome Dr. Hasnain Walji also. Dr. Hasnain, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yes.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that, for those kind words, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Your volume is a little bit low, I think. So.
Okay, I will try and speak up.
Yes, that's much better. Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay.
Dr.
Yes.
Aslam, with that, I'll hand it over to you then, inshallah.
I think, Brother Aleem, what you have started at IslamiCity is really historic in the sense that in our generation, at people's level, this kind of effort is being made where the people who come from different sects and different communities are coming together to pay tribute to one of the mightiest personalities in Muslim history. And certainly we will hear from Dr. Hasnain about him. I think what is important also to remember that Dr. Hasnain would start a series on the struggles of Imam Hussein and on his quest for peace and justice tomorrow from Dallas at 7 Eastern Standard Time. And I think he would also mention the link also. It's a 6-day and 6-part series. Probably that would also be useful. And he would also join us tomorrow. And whenever he would have time, he would be part of this discussion. So without any further delay, I would ask Dr. Hasnain to start with his perspectives on what we should know about Imam Hussein.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aslam, for that introduction. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, Brother Aleem, IslamiCity, and of course, my dear friend, Dr. Aslam, to in fact facilitate this. Like you said, this is a much needed and a rare occurrence where we come together on platforms like these so that we are able to better understand. It's ironic that we do more interfaith work than intrafaith work. And I think we need to do a lot of intrafaith work amongst ourselves as well. So with that said, very quickly, I'll jump into the task that has been set for me. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen, Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Abul Qasim Muhammad. The ayah that we began with talks about fighting in the way of Allah. There is also another complementary ayah that comes to mind when we talk about the story of Karbala, the story of giving. So it is a story of fighting, and it's also a story of giving. The ayah is لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that never shall you achieve righteousness unless you give something out of that which you love. So Karbala is an admixture of this fight against tyranny. At the same time, it is an event of giving the ultimate that the Shuhada, the martyrs of Karbala, gave in their time. So I think it's very pertinent, the juxtaposition of the two ayah, because the ayah of that I began with to say, never shall you achieve righteousness, was something in my mind. Whenever I talk about Karbala, this is the first ayah that comes to mind. Yesterday, very eloquently and very succinctly, Dr. Aslam talked about Hijrah and its importance. And a phrase that stuck in my mind when I was listening yesterday was that the Blessed Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wasallam made this hijrah, and Dr. Aslam mentioned that it was a dream to create a society with justice. And then very eloquently, Dr. Aslam also covered during question time the idea of the Medina Constitution. And what also struck me there was that the inclusivity that the Medina Constitution gave us was that despite the fact that two of the tribes refused to sign or be part of the Constitution, there was no victimization, there was no marginalization. Indeed, they were taken as part and parcel of the Medina society. This was the inclusive spirit that was taught to us by the Blessed Prophet, peace be upon him. And indeed, it is in that spirit of inclusivity that I truly laud and applaud the efforts of IslamiCity, Dr. Aslam, Brother Alim, amongst others, to create this platform where as Muslims, we come together with that spirit of inclusivity. Because that is, the Medina society was exactly what the Blessed Prophet brought about. And that indeed was the mission of Imam Hussain alayhi salam in terms of filling society with justice. Now, the discussion today is based on 2 points. Why is this martyrdom important for us all to remember? That's one aspect. And the second one that Dr. Aslam posed to me was what can be done to liberate Imam Hussain from the Shia Sunni circles and project him as a revolutionary, as a change agent. So I will do my best. I'm not as learned, as eloquent as Dr. Aslam, and I'm sure that he will help me out in terms of trying to explain some of these concepts. So the first one is, why do we remember something that happened about 1381 or 1340 years, depending on whether you follow the Hijra calendar or the Gregorian calendar? But we must, in order to learn from history, to guide us as to what do we do today if we were faced with a similar situation. So that is something that we need to look at and consider. You know, it is just simply amazing that for the next 10 days, you have over 200 million people in all parts of the world getting involved in remembrance ceremonies, commemorations, majalis, lectures, passion plays, whatever you call it, the entire culture that has been developed around the remembrance of Imam Hussein al-Islam is, and I think Brother Aslam will appreciate this more than most, uh, both of us having spent our formative years in the UK, it used to be said that the sun does not set on the British Empire. Those were the days that the sun did not set on the British Empire. Well, today when we look at it, the 10 days of commemoration that started on Wednesday night or Thursday night, depending on where you were, from Auckland, New Zealand to Vancouver, those commemorations are on every hour of the day, 24 hours. So the sun does not set on the remembrance of Imam Hussein al-Islam, particularly during these 10 days. And that indeed is something worth pondering as to what is it that motivates all these people to do what they do. You know, I remember in 2003, April, when Saddam fell, and suddenly there was this suppressed notion of visiting the shrine of Imam Hussein in Iraq. And while the Iraqi borders had not even opened up, there were at least a couple of million people who rushed towards the shrine on the 40th of Imam Hussein, on the Shahadat of Imam Hussein. And what struck me was that Washington Post on that day, and I have that particular cutting somewhere, but I remember that well, to say that the US planners, surprised by the strength of Iraqi Shias in terms of the numbers. This was a reference to the US administration's response to the Arba'in processions in Karbala at that time. I am surprised that they were surprised. They were supposed to go and create some solutions out there, came out with creating a bigger mess than that could ever have been created. But the surprise is that they could not understand the importance of Imam Hussein to the people of Iraq. So that is the juxtaposition, that this tragedy has staying power. Why remember? Because every significant event that has ever unfolded on the face of this earth, in a temporal sense, is that it occurs in a particular time-space setting. It was 61 Hijrah in Iraq, in Karbala, a journey from Medina to Mecca and then on to Karbala. This was in a time-space setting. But at the same time, this journey was eternal because the temporal aspect is discrete and entrenched in time, determining the course of succeeding events. This eternal aspect serves as a cornerstone in times to come, something to remind us, something to guide us, as a beacon in order to make sense of the past, reconcile with the present, so that we are able to map out the future. So when it comes to tragedy, this memory can be even stronger and it can sometimes overshadow the event itself. There were 72, by some accounts 110 in Karbala at that time. Today there are millions who espouse that spirit. That memory has grown because Karbala is a memory. Such is the timelessness of this memory that the cries of Karbala of those children saying, Al-Atash, we are thirsty, still echoes in the air after all these centuries. The symbolism that is attached has attracted poets, mourners, mystics, revolutionaries, devotees, writers alike to be inspired to do what they do best, and that is to express. So such is the appeal of the tragedy that Karbala has become a significant constituent of the cultural construct of Muslims and non-Muslims in many cases around the globe. So that is why we remember this tragedy, as it were, that this is indeed a memory. And before I ask Brother Alim to play a short video, which will save me from a lot of explanations, because as say, a picture is 1,000 words. This is a 5-minute video of many pictures, so it could be millions of words that we could go through, and I would not be able to convey it. But in terms of the permanence of the tragedy of Karbala, Allama Iqbal said it best, and one can do no better than look at what Allama Iqbal says in terms of how transcendent the truth is, while the nature of the oppressors and the hypocrites keeps changing. And that truly is a message to say truth is constant. In Urdu they say, Sach ghate ya bade, sach na rahe, jhoot ki koi inteha hi nahi. You may stretch falsehood to whatever degree, and you could keep stretching it. You cannot reduce or you cannot expand the truth. Truth is the truth. So Allama Iqbal says, in terms of Karbala, to say haqiqat-e abadi hai maqam-e shabiri. Haqiqat-e abadi hai maqam-e shabiri, badalte rehte hain andaz-e kufi o sham. And this is what truly happened, that the station of Hussein is the eternal truth. This is what he stood for. The ways of the Kufis and the Shami. Reference here, of course, is to the hypocrites, and those who turn of Kufa and Syria are ever changing. This applies everywhere today, that there are those who continue to change, their colors, they're ever changing. But truth that was brought and that was upheld by the Blessed Prophet, peace be upon him, and the other prophets, which were carried forward by Imam Hussain alayhi salam, is something that is eternal. So that really is why we need to remember the tragedy of Karbala and the remembrance rites. And if I may ask Brother Alim to perhaps play that video so we can imbibe what really happened at that time. Thank you.
48 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, his grandson Hussein was killed in the Battle of Karbala. Why did this battle happen, and why is it so important to Islamic history? After the fourth Caliph Ali was assassinated in 661, a power vacuum emerged, leading to Muawiyah assuming role as Caliph, despite opposition from part of the Ummah who wanted Hassan, son of Ali, who was the grandson of the Prophet, as the Caliph. To avoid further bloodshed after years of conflict, Hassan signed a peace treaty with Muawiyah. This treaty stipulated that Muawiyah would not appoint a successor after him. In the year 670, Hassan was assassinated, leaving his brother Hussein to take on his duties. The treaty was breached when Muawiyah named his son Yazid his successor in 680, beginning the Umayyad dynasty. Yazid spread his power through corruption, bribery, and the use of violence. To legitimize his rule, Yazid demanded allegiance from Hussein. Hussein refused, as Yazid was openly corrupt and known to be brutal. Hussein was forced to flee Medina under threat of imprisonment and assassination. He had received thousands of letters from Kufa, Iraq, pledging support for an uprising against Yazid. Of his refusal to pay allegiance, he said, "I am ready to fight for the sole goal of seeking the reform of the Ummah of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah. I want to enjoin good and forbid evil." Hussein first went to Mecca for Hajj, but then left to avoid violence and preserve the sanctity of the holy city. Hussein departed with his family and companions to Kufa. In response to the threat of rebellion from the Kufans, Yazid dispatched the governor to Kufa to quash dissent. This led to thousands of Kufans withdrawing their support under threat of violence. As they approached Kufa, Hussein's caravan was intercepted by a battalion of Yazid's army led by a man named Hur al-Riyahi. A greater army which numbered in the thousands, led by Umar bin Sa'ad, joined him and surrounded Hussein's camp in what is now known as Karbala in modern-day Iraq. The army cut off access to water for Hussein and his family, leaving the men, women and children to suffer from days of thirst in Iraq's blistering desert heat. The army demanded allegiance from Hussein, threatening him with death. Despite all the odds, Hussein refused to back down. On the night before the battle, Hussein told his companions that they were free to leave, but they pledged to stand beside him in the face of certain defeat. The following morning, on the 10th of Muharram, known as the day of Ashura, Hussein delivered a powerful speech, reminding the opposition that he was still the grandson of the Prophet and that he still wished to leave. Moved by Hussein's speech, Hur abandoned Ibn Sa'd's army and joined Hussein's. The battle commenced, with Hussein's 70-odd companions facing off against an army of what many historians number to be 30,000. The companions of Hussein fought group by group and were martyred on the battlefield. Eventually, Hussein was left with a handful of remaining family members. They too were killed. Hussein, now with no one beside him, pleaded with the enemy forces for water for his 6-month-old baby. The enemy responded by firing a fatal arrow at the infant, killing Hussein's child in his arms. Hussein buried the child and bid farewell to the women and children of his camp. He fiercely charged into the battlefield, where, after fighting valiantly, eventually fell from his horse and was surrounded by the enemy soldiers. The grandson of the Prophet was brutally attacked from all sides and beheaded. The enemy forces attacked and plundered the possession of the dead bodies as well as the camp of Hussein's family. The tents were set ablaze with the women inside, which included granddaughters of the Holy Prophet. The family were taken captive by Yazid's army, later to be paraded to Damascus in Syria. The story of Karbala shook the Muslim Ummah as news spread, launching several uprisings across the Muslim empire. Many argue that the Battle of Karbala forever changed the course of Islamic history. The day of Ashura is mourned globally by millions of Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, to honor the heroic stand of the Prophet's grandson, Hussein.
That heart-rending episode that we just saw is a reality. It's well recorded by the likes of Abu Miknaf, and perhaps Dr. Aslam, as a historian, can also speak to that, that this was written, and Tabari and others have taken from Abu Miknaf in terms of what really happened. It is probably one of the most well-recorded piece of history that we have. Amongst that, there is a phrase that was uttered by Imam Hussein alayhi salam, besides many speeches that he gave. In the interest of time, I will just focus on one. It's a short sentence with a huge amount of meaning. He said, "Mithli la yubayihu mithlahu." That a person like me, normally it is recorded to say Imam Hussein refused the bay'ah of Yazid, that he refused to give the oath of allegiance to Yazid. In fact, Imam's words were much deeper than that, because in this phrase, he says, a person like me can never do bay'ah or pay allegiance to a person like him. So here, Imam Hussein was actually laying down a criteria of leadership as to who you pay your allegiance to. And it is through that that we understand truly the essence of Karbala. I know that we're pretty close to the time here, and I had much to say. But what is the relevance today of Karbala? How does it impact us in terms of social justice? And inshallah, if you join me from Saturday onwards at the YouTube channel of standwithdignity.org, you will be able to access this, and I'll be happy to share this with Brother Alim to send this out. We'll go deeper into some of the relevance. But for today, I will end on this note. What is the relevance today? Firstly, whoever is with Hussein, whoever stands with the principles of Imam Hussein, cannot pledge allegiance to an oppressor, nor can such a person fight alongside an oppressor or excuse an oppressor or justify his oppression. This is the standard that Imam Hussein set. And therefore, yes, while we cry and the tears have value, we need to shorten our tears when they're only the tears of history. And let these tears flow when they are the tears for the oppressed and the downtrodden human beings today. That truly is a relevance that we have today. So the issue is not to cry much, though crying has its meaning. And the issue is not to mourn much, though that has its symbolism. The issue here is to face that reality in its entirety and to live that reality as Imam Hussein lived it. That the chosen ones of his family and the companions lived it. The martyrs of Karbala lived it. And that truly is a meaning of remembering. And how do we, liberate him is to enter into the basis of social justice issues today, that we project this message of Hussein of justice to the entire world. And I'll end with the couplet from Najam Afandi, a great poet, to say that Gehware Beshir pe roye to bahut, Gehware Beshir pe roye to bahut, Gehware zindagi mein aankhein na khuli. That upon the crib of Ali Asgar, the baby, who also was martyred, the eyes have flowed with tears, but in the crib of life, those very eyes have remained shut. Then we would have kept Imam Hussein al-Islam embedded within the four walls of the Imam Bargas in the centers and where we commemorate, and we will not liberate him for the rest of the world. With that, I stop here. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I was saying is that Dr. Walji's presentation is really very moving and very powerful. And this is what our dream and our aspirations are, that one day we who have been apart for several centuries come together, take a stand on social justice, not only for Muslims, not only for Shias, not only for Sunnis, but for every human being. Because this is what the Quran demands from us. Hussein radiallahu ta'ala was following that Quran, was living that Quran in the shadow of his grandfather. And that is the task that we both have, rather than pointing fingers at each other, come together for the cause of justice. And one point I wanted to mention, that the silence of many of the scholars at that particular time about this event has echoed throughout Muslim century and Muslim history. And it has conditioned our mind to accept oppression and to accept injustice, or to justify injustice, or to justify oppression, with total disregard to the Quranic message, total disregard to the traditions of the Prophet who stood up for peace and justice in his time. So I think we need to make that kind of beginning. And perhaps, inshallah, tomorrow when we have, Dr. Walji also, we can have the discussion on how we can patch up those kind of differences, at a small scale, step by step, to see if God helps us in achieving that goal of unity amongst each one of us. So I'll give it back to you, Brother Alim, if you have any comments. Okay.
No, thank you so much for this exceptional presentation, Dr. Walji. We sincerely appreciate you coming here, and we hope that we can continue this discussion tomorrow with you, where we can actually talk about some concrete steps. What can Shias and Sunnis do to alleviate these differences and these divides that have been imposed on us. Well, thank you again, Dr. Walji, for being with us.
Thank you.
We're going to end the session right now, but if you can just stay back for just a little bit, we'll just coordinate some of the things for tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us today, and we look forward to having all of you tomorrow. Please share this with your friends and family also. And as Dr. Walji mentioned, the website where he is doing the presentation is standwithdignity.org. Again, standwithdignity.org. That's where he is doing a session for 6 days, starting at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and we will be able to learn more from that session also.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Muqallib al-Qulub, Thabbit qalbi ala dinik. Ya Allah, give us the tawfiq to be steadfast on our path towards justice. Ya Allah, give us that ability to cross all those bridges that we have still to cross in terms of bringing the message of Imam Hussain alayhi salam to each other and to the entire world. And Ya Allah, accept the small efforts on our part to serve humanity. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.